with us, and we're, of course, being graced with our own very celebrated novelist, journalist, and very dear friend, Mohammad Hanif. Blair was educated at Eton, born in India, foremost, to rich earnings. It's always difficult being the son of a famous farmer. How difficult or how easy has it been for you, Richard?
I hope everyone can hear me properly. It's actually, because I was an adopted son by my father, Eric Arthur Blair, it's interesting because he died in 1950, I was only 5.5 years old, and his reputation from 1950 onwards until the present day, of course, has accelerated. And I suppose I've grown up with it, and I've grown up with his fame as it increased. But what I have done, in fact, of course, not everybody realizes that George Orwell was in fact Eric Arthur Blair, and my name is Richard Blair. So I've actually slightly hidden behind the edifice of Eric Arthur Blair. And so I've been able to observe from the outside, looking in slightly, which is, I suppose, is a little bit, hiding myself. But it's quite interesting because I can watch what's going on about me. I quite enjoy that.
Well, the world doesn't know very much about you except for the fact that you're a retired engineer.
My background, in fact, is farming, and then I joined a tractor company called Massey Ferguson, of which there are many examples out in Pakistan. In fact, I saw many this morning, or bits of them. And I was made redundant back in the 80s, so I went off and I did my own thing. My wife and I started a business up in the part of the world which I consider to be my spiritual home, which was where my father went after the war in 1946 when he moved to Scotland, to the west of Scotland, to the remote island of Jura, where he rented a farmhouse. And that is where I was brought up, as a boy, and I lived with him from 1946 until he died in 1950. Although sadly he was in fact in hospital quite a lot of the time. But it was an idyllic boyhood. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I was never lonely. There were always friends and relations staying with us. Being with my father had a dilemma. On the one hand, he desperately wanted to have a child, and he and his wife Eileen made arrangements to adopt a child, which I was the product of an affair during the war. However, he was suffering from TB. Now, of course, TB being infectious, he had this problem of, on the one hand, making sure that he was father to me. In other words, he was able to do all the things that fathers would do. In fact, he was quite hands-on in many ways, unlike many fathers of that period. But nevertheless, he had to distance himself slightly, especially when he was having his coughing spasms. And he was frightened, of course, of passing on this disease to me. However, in many of his letters, he writes to his friends saying that I don't think Richard is going to suffer too badly. He is a robust little child, and we will make jolly sure that he's all right. We'll have him examined in London when the time comes. So he and I had this sort of strange relationship in that we obviously loved me, but I had other people around me as well. But we did things together. He would write during the day. You could hear him tapping on his typewriter up in his bedroom.
Decrepit old typewriter it was.
But
apparently it was a very old.
Well, apparently it was, yes. And apparently there's a typewriter in that bedroom to this day, which is supposed to be the one which is an apocryphal story, and I can assure you it's not. But he would write during the day, and then at night time or after supper, he would come down in the summertime, and we would go out in our little dinghy, and we would go fishing. We would go fishing for lobsters, crabs, and mackerel. So these were things that we did together, and it was, I suppose, it was all part of being brought up.
There's that very famous episode about you going boating with your father along with 3 of your cousins, and being, in a sense, boat wrecked.
Yes.
And when he was rescuing you, he looked up and saw a seal. And he's supposed to have remarked, curious thing about seals, very inquisitive creatures.
Well, they are indeed our seals. That particular occasion was his fault. He misread the timetable. In that part of Scotland, the west of Scotland, there are very strong tides that run, and we had been round to the back of the island that we lived on, the island of Jura, to have a weekend of rest and recreation. And my father and I and 2 of his a niece and a nephew, 4 of us in the dinghy, decided to come back through this very famous stretch of water, which was treacherous, and he misread the tide table. We lost the outboard, it got dragged off the stern of the dinghy. His nephew, Henry, then had to row to a rocky island where the boat, he jumped out, he took the mooring rope, and the boat went up the rocks on the swell. The swell receded, and we slid back down into the water, turned upside down with my father. Well, I was sitting on my father's knee, and we came out scuffling from underneath. Up to that point, I thought the whole thing was a great joke. I imagined being dipped in very cold water.
You were only 3 years old.
I was 3.5 years old, yes. But the point about the story, of course, was that we got ashore and we were rescued. But the point was where we were and the situation that we were in, cold water, strong tides, we could, or he could have easily have hit his head on a rock and knocked himself unconscious, or the tide, the current could have drifted away, he'd have drowned. And of course the point was that he was halfway through writing 1984. So there would have been no Orwell, no 1984.
Great. The year 1984 has come and gone, a long time ago. But we're finding that there's hardly a day that goes by that something is not, in some sense or the other, associated with Orwell. Sometimes it's used pejoratively, and sometimes it's used as a compliment. Hanif, you being a practicing journalist, is there any other writer occupying such an immediate space right now?
No, not that I know of.
So he has a monopoly on that, does he?
I'm sure he does. I do not know of any other writer from our times who has been so prophetic, and sometimes we as writers and journalists wake up and curse George Orwell, because sometimes it does seem that we live in a world that was dreamed up by Orwell himself. Simple.
Well, I think one comment of his that I've read applies directly to media here in Pakistan, and I'd like to quote that. He says, early in life, I had noticed that no event is ever correctly represented in a newspaper. So that's the value he places on newspapers. You write for a lot of them. So, are you then correctly interpreting?
No, I was thinking of George Orwell today as because here's a festival, so many nice people, he's flown over, you've prepared your notes. Now you pick up today's newspaper, any newspaper, English or Urdu, that are published here, and try and find out what exactly happened here today. Why are we sitting here? And why not there? This festival was supposed to happen, which is a public place, Alhambra Arts Center. So, in Lahore, I live in Karachi, which is a dangerous city. Lahore has been one of Pakistan's most peaceful, relatively peaceful.
But it's a dangerous city, nevertheless.
Peaceful cities. Let me try and kind of see what the newspapers tell you and what they won't tell you. So you basically have a government which has been around forever. Since I was started into journalism, there was a Sharif in power in Punjab, and now there's a Sharif here and there's a Sharif in Islamabad. This is the third time that he is the Prime Minister of Pakistan, and this is probably second or third time that we have the same Chief Minister. So obviously, these are popular people. Nobody can do anything about them. People love them. You elected them. Sorry, why are you looking at me? You elected them. So this government tells me that we have security issues, which is a serious thing. We should take security seriously. We don't want people getting killed just because they won't come and listen to writers. I would not advise that to anybody. But the government says we cannot give you security on Friday, but we can give it to you on Saturday and Sunday.
It's the weekend.
Yes. We cannot give you security across the road. No. That is problematic. Just go into this place and then maybe we can give you security. After the session, you go back and read all the papers. Will any newspaper tell you that what the hell did just happen? Why would a government which is so secure, so loved by its own people, would think that Mr. Blair and Navid, Shahzad, who's always lived in Lahore and is a very popular figure here, why is his security set on Saturday and not on Friday? Like why? What? How do they? So you can. I'm sure people here. I think you should give them a chance to kind of quote George Orwell. But everybody has. We've grown up reading these things, and we used to think that these things are bizarre. They don't make no sense. All animals are equal, but
some are
more equal than others. And then I kind of can remember odd lines from novels like I sold you when you sold me, or things like that. So I don't know who is selling who in this city. So that's why you cannot get rid of George Orwell, because you wake up and you think, oh my God, George Orwell. Yeah.
Here's another Orwellian day. You know, Hanif always has this wonderfully droll, understated take on everything. And when I first met him, I thought I was a little intimidated by his sense of humor. I'm not anymore, because it is the sense of humor, or the kind of humor, that we require so very much these days in order to survive. Thank you, Hanif. I think what we need to talk about today, and particularly with Richard here, who is patron of the George Orwell Society, are the kind of permanent fixtures that, in a sense, dictated Orwell's position as far as his politics was concerned. He was a member of the Independent Labour Party. He was what is known as a social democrat, totally anti-Stalin, anti-Hitler, and so on. But what fascinates me is his take on history, because his wonderful quote about history is written by the victors. When we look at our own history, for example, we look at what we call the War of Independence and what is called the Great Mutiny. After all, it's the same event, but looked at by two totally different points of view. Orwell is a revisionist. Do you think something like that is happening in Pakistan, or is it still on the periphery? For both of you.
Well, the thing about Orwell was, of course, he had his stance. He was, in many ways, an old-fashioned socialist. what he wanted to write about was he wanted to expose some sort of what he called a grubby lie. Something that the government was putting over, but was putting a slight skew on it somewhere along the line that wasn't just quite right. And he wanted to draw our attention to it, saying, look, you are being lied to, quietly in the background here. They are trying to put over something that isn't quite right. It's interesting that when he wrote Homage to Catalonia, when he fought in the Spanish Civil War, he lost a lot of his notes, in fact, to the KGB, and they are supposed to be residing in the archives in Moscow, and we've been trying to find out. But the thing was that when he wrote Homage to Catalonia, he made it quite clear two things. One, that he was writing from memory, and he was writing about the things that he saw in his theatre of war, which was, of course, in Barcelona and out on the Aragon front in the trenches. Now, it's interesting that, in fact, the Catalonians, and a lot of Spanish people, certainly Catalonians, are very interested in, the Orwell Society, which we made quite a hit with them. But a lot of the young people are now wanting to know what happened between 1935 and 1975 when Franco died. It is a black hole for many people, and the Spanish government seems to have some sort of selective amnesia about such matters. And the Spanish really would like to know what's going on. And Orwell was the one person who was able to give them some sort of idea of the truth as he saw it in Spain in his theatre of war. So he was very, very aware of knocking on the head those little lies that people like to tell in order to promote their version of events and history. And you're quite right in that the victor is the one that normally writes the history, because the losers, well, they try, but no one believes them, of course. That's the problem.
Well, we're very familiar with selective amnesia, are we not, Mohammad? Because after all, we have amnesia about the East Pakistan, and about the Hamoud-ur-Rahman report, and about several other things that we choose to forget, and how the history of Pakistan begins only with a particular invasion, and that nothing and no one lived here prior to that.
Yes, and since we're talking about fathers and sons, so I have a son who's in high school right now. So he, in his literature class, he read a novel by this Bangladeshi writer. It's part of their syllabus. It's called The Golden Age, by a friend of mine. It's a brilliant, beautiful novel about 71 war. So while he was reading this novel, he's not a big reader. He kind of, but he had to because of his exam. So he comes up to me and he says, "Bangladesh used to be part of Pakistan?" I was like, "Yes." He said, "Oh, I didn't know it." But then he again comes back to me. He said, "But Pakistan is here and Bangladesh is like there. There's a huge country. It seemed like a really bad idea," he says. I said, "Yeah, probably, they didn't think about it." But obviously we kind of write things out of our memory, out of our collective memory. For example, you mentioned partition. Right here in Punjab, you kind of get out of Lahore, call it Azadi or freedom, and that's what happened. You ask people what happened in August 47. But I've met lots of old people who lived through that time, and they remember that time. Oh, loot basic. Okay, it was a time of looting, and some of them were victims of it, and some of them were perpetrators. Some got killed, and others, others survived, and others killed. Like when a couple of million people die, within a short span of time. And remember that we didn't used to have Kalashnikovs there or suicide bombers or no. So the killing had to be done by hand, with machetes and swords and knives and everything. So it's hard work.
How much more brutal?
Hard, yes. So to kill 2 million people, I'm sure there were lots and lots more people who actually did participate in it. But when we read our history, it's always that there were trains coming from Amritsar to Lahore which were full of bodies. Nobody talks about the trains that were going from here to. So I think I guess that's something that nations do to kind of to keep themselves together, to kind of to move on. But they should be, and I think that's why George Orwell matters today even more than anybody else. That even that there should be people who would stand up, who will have the space to say that actually, hang on, this is not what happened. This is not how it happened. There was another side to the story, and let me tell you that story. And I think what George Orwell did and achieved, which as far as I know, no writer has been able to do, that he could tell that story very well. It just wasn't like point of view that he was giving them. He was actually creating that world for you. I'm sure even today, I'm not just talking about Pakistan, Karachi. There's wherever English language is read and it's been translated into God knows whatever languages are there, there are still high school children thinking of making animal form into a drama production in a new way, and still trying to decide, which is the point I think, which that is the stage that we are, that who really are the pigs. And I think that's our main, that's the question that he left us with, that we cannot decide who are the pigs and who are the kids who are going to play those pigs.
Well, you use the word freedom, and I think that in Orwell's context really is very important, because he says freedom is the freedom to say that 2 plus 2 is 4. I ask you, is it really as simple as that?
Actually, well, you hear me all right, yeah. One of the things he said about freedom was the right to say something that people didn't want to hear. Now, that's an interesting point, because we are now getting to a situation, certainly in America and to some extent in the United Kingdom, in universities, where the students are protesting about things that they see, which, history, which they feel shouldn't be said. That people, we are not being allowed to say what we feel. I'm not suggesting we should say with a half brick in your right hand, but we should be able to talk and argue cogently about things that people might not necessarily agree with. But there is nothing wrong with the freedom to speak your mind.
You talked about Homage to Catalonia, which is a memoir. It's only about 100 pages long, but unfortunately not read enough. Now, when you look at that, and you look at Ernest Hemingway's For Whom the Bell Tolls, these are two versions of the same war, the Spanish Civil War. One an American view and fiction, the other an English view. I'd like to say that very clearly, because it is really, in a sense, his experience of the Spanish Civil War lies at the very core, at the very heart of all his political stances. Both of them, such different versions, but both of them say exactly the same thing. And they say reporting on war must be done on a first-hand basis.
Absolutely, and that's how Orwell chose to do it. He chose to go to Spain because he felt that there was a right that needed to be a wrong that needed to be put right. And as I said before, he could only report about what he saw. There were many people from the English intelligentsia who went out there. who didn't actually go there, or they kind of wandered around on the periphery. But at least Orwell went in there and actually fought. Sadly, of course, he was shot, so he didn't fight for very long. But he just simply realized when he was there that what he had gone out, what he thought was a straightforward argument, that the peasants, the workers versus the church and the landowners, wasn't as simple as it appeared to be. And in fact, it was a very, very complex argument. Of course, the problem with the Spanish Civil War is that you have to go back probably 100 years or even longer, because it was something that's built up over decades and decades and decades until it finally erupted in the 1930s. So he was only a very small part of. Interestingly, I heard many years ago a Spanish professor of history saying that Orwell was the only honest historian to have reported about the Spanish Civil War.
Well, he's often cited as an example of how intellectually true he was to events that he saw. Hanif, we have a lot of events happening in Pakistan, if you can call them events, incidents, terrorism and so on. How much of the reporting that we read and see is actually done by people on the spot, which is what Orwell is talking about. Because he says you cannot represent the truth unless you're actually there yourself.
I don't think we've there are lots of kids here, so I don't want to go back too much in time. But since I think these guys have been in school, they've been at war. We might argue about whose war and where is it happening and why is it happening and should it be happening or not. But actually, there's a war going on. Has anybody seen this war? We fly planes, go and bomb an area, and we come back and see in the newspapers that 40 terrorists happened. That's like a routine headline. I do not know a single reporter in Pakistan, and I have been a reporter for a very long time. So even if I don't do enough reporting, I know reporters who, nobody. There's not, and those who have tried to get close to that theatre, they get killed. Pakistan has lost lots of citizens. Pakistan has lost lots of soldiers. Pakistan also lost quite a few journalists.
That's true.
Who tried to go and do the count, and actually who exactly is being killed and by whom. So it's a dangerous business. So that's why we just sit in our newsrooms. We just wait on our computers that somebody will tell us what happened, and then we will report it, and then after that we will analyze it. And we can be smug about it, that okay, these reading and writing things are getting together like this and talking about ideas is a completely safe thing. But just last year in Karachi, one of the most formidable persons in Karachi, one of the most brilliant young woman that Karachi has produced, Sabine Mahmood, my close friend. Here in the city, at a university, LUMS, let's name names, they organized an event about Balochistan. There is another war that's going on that nobody has seen, and we're not allowed.
Nobody knows anything
we're
about
not allowed to. We're not, and there is a reason that we're not allowed to see, because there are risks involved. So it rarely ever happens. Even with this festival being located from here to there, there was a government order issued that, this is cancelled, we cannot provide these security. Fair enough. So, into the university walk in two guys in suits, and they say, we are from the intelligence agency and you cannot have this event. Now, A, it's not legal. B, it's completely stupid. But and you're walking into a university which is full of very expensive lawyers and very well-connected people. The best education that you can buy in Pakistan is available there. And they say, this is not legal, but since you are saying it, we won't do it. Event is cancelled. Right? We will wear black bands, we will protest, but we will not do it. So somebody sitting in Karachi who runs a place like a room, little like half of this stage,
tiny
half of this stage. So she said, oh, we'll do it here because we are not like them. We are not big. We are not scared, and we are small. Nobody really. She didn't have Netflix, right? We worked together many times. So you work with this idea that we're too small. 100 people sitting in a room talking about an issue which is a real issue. The people are getting killed, your soldiers are getting killed, Baloch students are getting killed, Baloch activists are getting killed, people are being arrested and disappear for years, and then their dead bodies turn up, right? This is something that we all know about. We are not allowed to talk about it. So the most expensive university in Pakistan says that, you know, the state has told us we will not talk about it, so we will not talk about it. So she says we will talk about it. And we will talk about it in the most balanced, the most decent way that we can. There will be no shouting matches, there will be like whosoever wants to come and give their point of view. The discussion takes place. Very civilized, very decent, no threats. Half an hour later, she's shot dead. Now, and that was less than a year ago. And now the authorities, the investigators, the police want us to believe, and I'm willing to believe, that this had nothing to do with what you just did. That we killed you, somebody killed you, but it had, please do not make any connections. So what is the connection? That last year you said something about Valentine's Day. That's why somebody has killed you. So who is the person who's killed you? We've caught him. And the person has confessed. And he's with us in the jail. And he will hang. And while this person, the alleged killer who is confessed, is in jail, one of the two eyewitnesses gets killed. We are still being told to believe it had something to do with her being obnoxious on a Valentine's Day. It had nothing to do with this very serious, sober conversation that she arranged that nobody else in Pakistan was supposed to have. That's why we kind of think up every day that, oh, there was somebody called George Orwell.
Well, that really sums up so beautifully what the state of Pakistan is all about at the moment. There's a wonderfully prescient line from Orwell where the state says, in the shape of O'Brien, we will squeeze you empty and then we will fill you with ourselves. And that is precisely what is happening. Like tubes of toothpaste, we are being squeezed empty, and you know you can't refill a tube of toothpaste. So something else is happening, and that something is when the state starts to tell you blatant lies. And that is why Orwell is as relevant today as he was in the 40s when he was writing. I'd like to shift the focus a little bit to something that I think a lot of readers do not know about, and with Richard's permission, be a little risque, if I can, about Orwell. He actually had a sense of humor. This came to me as a great surprise, because I taught Orwell at university level, and I taught 1984 and, of course, Animal Farm, which he very nicely calls a fairy tale. I hadn't realized there was this perfectly balanced side to him, because we'd grown up thinking about him as someone who was gloomy, as someone who was committed, an extremely complicated and complex person. come across an enormous amount of humor, especially when we talk about literary journalism and the kind of essays that he writes. For example, one of my favorites is this essay that he writes about how to make a good cup of tea, and another one where he writes about the ordinary toad. And I wouldn't think that a man the same sensibility that produces 1984 or Animal Farm or Homage to Catalonia or a hanging or Vegan Beer for example, or Coming Up for Air, or the 80-odd essays that he writes for The Observer, for his friend David Astor, would be capable of this kind of sense of humor. Would you remember anything at all? I know it's a very dicey question. Just 6 years old.
You have to be very careful about what you think you remember versus what you've been told versus fact and fiction starting to overlap. I think we all have that problem as we get older. He was very good, and of course obviously I can't remember what the stories he would tell me, but certainly he used to write and recite poetry to me. A lot of it was never written down, or if it has been, it's long gone. In fact, you were talking about humor, and if I might be allowed to recite a little poem that he wrote after, I think it was in the early 40s, about his time in Burma. I will fish it out because I happen to have it with me. There is
Are you reading romance?
I'm thinking of romance.
Are you reading romance?
Yes, am I allowed to read
Yes,
it?
of course. Yes, of course. That's the poem I selected.
Oh.
Oh, please.
I hope I we don't upset your sensibilities here, because it's quite naughty. It's quite short. When I was young and had no sense, in far-off Mandalay, I lost my heart to a Burmese girl, as lovely as the day. Her skin was gold, her hair was jet, her teeth were ivory. I said, for 20 silver pence, maiden, sleep with me. She looked at me so pure, so sad, the loveliest thing alive, and in her lisping virgin voice, stood out for 25. So you see, he had quite a sharp and delicious sense of humor. He was, I mean, his essays, such as such were the joys about his prep school days, which he wrote towards the end of his life, and in fact was not published until several years after, for the simple reason that the protagonists of the school had to die before it was allowed to be published. Otherwise, the estate would have been sued. And it's a lot of it is slightly made up. It's kind of tongue in cheek, but it's really quite deliciously amusing. And a lot of his stuff is there's humor everywhere, and even in some of the more serious parts, there's something. He comes out with something that's interestingly humorous.
Well, that's greatness for you. I've just been told that we're running out of time. And we've got the last 5 minutes. But as a woman, I was very intrigued by Orwell's so-called misogyny, because he's very uncomfortable writing about women, even when he's writing about Julia, which is much later in his career. He's very awkward with women to begin with, and this is very surprising, because he has a great many women friends. His wife was a qualified psychologist, Eileen.
I did good, yes.
Yes. And her sister-in-law was a doctor and so on. So he was surrounded by women who were very accomplished, particularly so by standards of 1930 and 1940. He was a very close friend of the poet Stevie Smith and so on. But you find this awkwardness and this misogyny, I cannot call it anything but that, appearing time and time again in his work. For example, he looks at some postcards, and he talks about fat women in tight bathing suits. And then he talks about women who sat like two fat puddings. And he's very dismissive of women. Even though Julia is perhaps, I think, the best character that he presents in his entire career. I'm going to throw this open to Hanif, who is very comfortable talking about women, particularly their anatomy. And I'm going to ask him, why would you think, and this is the last piece, why would you think that he was a much loved man, and yet so very awkward about his treatment of women?
That's a generally historically known fact that men are awkward with women. So I think if we have only 5 minutes, we should let people.
Sure.
Just a final thing. I really think in many ways that Orwell's attitude towards women was the fact that he was not a smooth operator. In his defense, I would suggest that possibly had he lived his full 10, that he might have mellowed, he might have had an opportunity to explore that particular element of society, and may well have come up with some interesting answers and views. He was not again he wasn't against actually correcting himself from time to time. If he made a mistake, he would admit to it and say, no, maybe I was wrong. So he is always evolving what he possibly said in the past and goes back over it. But of course, tragically, he died at the age of 47, so he wasn't able to
Well, that's the Keynesian dilemma. Had he lived, how he would have evolved further. So I'm going to throw the forum open for questions. If there are any, I'm sure Richard and Hanif would be very happy to answer them. But just 2 questions, please. Anybody? VC. Can we have the microphone here, please? Excuse me. Hello. Right up front.
Thank you. Is it on? Yes. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to listen to you, all of you. I have one observation, and it's kind of a question, that when he came back from Spanish Civil War, he wrote certain articles, especially describing the control of the Republican Army by a Republican Party, by KGB headquartered in Paris. And he was not allowed to publish them in England because nobody would publish them, because at that time there was a very close relationship between the British and the Soviet Union in their war against yes. So that is one element, if you could shed some light. And the other very quick thing is that I see a connection between Huxley and Kafka and Orwell in the picture of the future society, or what happens in these closed societies. Thank you.
Well, I think the papers that you're talking about, Richard already referred to them, because there is the possibility that we may have access to these papers sometime in the future.
Yes, if I may just very quickly say that I actually had a reply from Moscow about 12 hours ago saying that they deny all knowledge of the existence. But then, as the Orwell Society member who happens to be Russian and who helped me to write, said that's the first step. We will pursue this a little further.
One last question.
The lady go there.
Stand up?
Yes, please.
My question is regarding Orwell's original introduction to Animal Farm, in which he discusses at length the extent to which he was prohibited from criticizing the left, particularly the Stalinist government in Russia during the 1930s and the later 1940s. So my question would be that you still see this trend in which criticism of an ideology from within itself and from people who in fact subscribe to it is looked down upon or reacted to very harshly.
Well, yes, of course, he did have major problems in publishing Animal Farm. He had to tout it around to all sorts of publishers. T.S. Eliot turned it down, famously turned it down. There's a man who lost a fortune because of our association, our relationship with Russia. And at the time, during the Second World War, of course, we were friends with the Russians. But Orwell knew exactly what was going on because he had seen it out in Spain. So that's why he had written Animal Farm as a sort of fable, could be read in all sorts of different levels. But it was a warning. This is how things can go if you don't watch it.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being such a good audience. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Hanif.